I woke up before dawn, the same way I had for over 40 years as a nurse. Even 7 years into retirement, the rhythm of early morning still clung to my bones like an old friend. Outside my bedroom window, Lakeview was draped in a dull October mist, the kind that made the streets look like they were holding secrets. I wrapped my faded blue robe tighter around my shoulders and shuffled into my small, warm kitchen. The kettle was my first companion each day. The soft whistle of boiling water felt like reassurance that some things at least never changed. On the fridge door, a neat shopping list was stuck with a souvenir magnet from my late husband Henry's business trip to Niagara Falls, a trip we once promised to repeat for our golden anniversary. Life had other plans. Today was the second Sunday of the month. For 3 years now, my daughter Octavia had made it our tradition to visit me with her husband Barnaby and their 2 children. "Mom, you need family around you?" She'd said after Henry's funeral, her voice sweet, but her eyes already measuring how much of my life she could rearrange. Back then I'd let her. Grief makes you obedient. But this morning as I stared at the list, chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and extra cookies for Felix, I felt a weight in my chest I couldn't name. I thought about Octavia's last visit, her careful inspections of my living room, her reminder that Henry's old chair makes the house look like a museum, her polite corrections of how I set the table, how I served the tea, how I spent the pension I had earned with tired hands and countless night shifts. A little voice inside me whispered, "Why do you let her?" Maybe because mothers are supposed to forgive. Or maybe because until now I hadn't known what it felt like to be so very alone. I boiled the water, made myself a cup of plain tea, and sat by the window where the garden looked dull and damp. I thought of Damien, my son, who lived 2 states away, happily free from family drama. He always called on my birthday and sent flowers at Christmas, but life had taught him to stay out of his sister's endless mission to fix me. As the tea warmed my throat, I imagined the hours ahead. Octavia would arrive with her perfect hair and her carefully chosen outfit. The children would sulk about the Wi-Fi. Barnaby would sit politely and nod at whatever she said. And I would smile, not serve, swallow my thoughts, just as always. But this Sunday felt different. There was an ache in my bones that told me I was tired, not just of being old, but of being controlled. I glanced again at Henry's chair in the corner, the leather still faintly smelling of his cologne, even after all these years. He would have hated seeing our daughter turn into this, a woman who dressed cruelty in good manners. The kettle whistled again. I had forgotten I'd refilled it. Absent-mindedly, I poured another cup, and this time I didn't add sugar. Octavia would scold me for it later. She'd say I should watch my blood sugar. She'd say it was irresponsible at my age. I laughed quietly into my cup. How many times had I traded my own choices for peace? Outside, a lone sparrow landed on the garden fence, shaking the mist from its feathers. A fragile thing, but free. I finished my tea and got dressed, a simple navy dress that Octavia said made me look older. Good. Let her think I was just the old fool she thought she could manage forever. I slipped on my shoes and picked up my shopping bag. Time to buy the chicken, the vegetables, the cookies Felix would barely touch. Time to play the doting mother a little longer. But deep inside something stubborn shifted. A tiny voice whispering, "Not forever. Not this time." The crisp air outside woke me better than the tea ever could. Maple Street stretched ahead like a quiet ribbon, old houses with their pumpkins still sitting bravely on the porches, left over from last week's Halloween. I clutched my shopping bag close to my side, taking small, steady steps so my knees wouldn't protest too loudly. In my younger days, I'd run errands between long hospital shifts, my feet blistered from standing 12 hours at a time. Back then, these streets had felt like my battleground and my sanctuary all at once. Now they felt more like a stage where I played the supporting role in my daughter's carefully scripted show. The supermarket's glass doors hissed open, releasing a wave of warm air and the smell of freshly baked bread. I paused at the entrance for a moment, steadying my breath. Small errands felt like marathons when you carried 70 years and a restless mind. I moved methodically down each aisle, the list replaying in my head. Chicken for the roast, because Octavia had vetoed beef too heavy. Mom, you'll raise everyone's cholesterol. Pork was forbidden too. Barnaby couldn't stand the smell. So chicken, always chicken. In the produce section, I weighed carrots and potatoes in my hand, picking only the firmest ones. Nearby, a young couple argued over which apples were organic. Their petty bickering drifted to my ears like faint echoes of my own marriage. Henry and I decades ago, teasing each other over whether Granny Smith or Fuji made the better pie. My eyes misted for a moment, but I blinked it away. Some memories had to stay soft and sweet. Moving on, I reached the dairy aisle. Felix liked processed cheese, though I knew it wasn't good for him. Cordelia pretended to like sharp cheddar because Octavia believed only refined tastes suited her family. I sighed and dropped both kinds in the basket, compromised the word that had defined my motherhood. At the checkout line, a young mother in front of me struggled to keep her 2 children from pulling candy off the shelf. I caught her eye and offered a gentle smile. For a brief second, she smiled back, tired, grateful, before turning to hush her little boy. I wondered if she too would someday sit alone in her kitchen, wondering where all that raw, bright love had gone, and why it had turned into something sharp and cold. When it was my turn, the teenage cashier barely looked at me. She scanned my items with robotic efficiency, popping gum between her teeth. I handed her cash, feeling a pinch of old pride. I still preferred paper bills over the plastic card Octavia kept insisting I should get with the times in use. "Have a nice day, ma'am," the girl mumbled, already shouting to her coworker about her lunch break. "Thank you, dear," I said, voice calm as a prayer. Outside, the gray sky threatened rain, so I wrapped my scarf tighter and began the short walk home. My bag felt heavier with each step, but I refused to stop. Not today. Not when I still had dinner to prepare, a table to set just so, and a smile to wear for my daughter's benefit. Halfway down Maple Street, I stopped to catch my breath near a low fence lined with withering mums. I watched a stray cat dart across someone's yard, its tail flicking like a little banner of rebellion. It reminded me of a story Henry once told the children, how a single stray cat could chase away every rat in a barn, simply by being brave enough. I stood straighter, lifted my chin, and pushed the thought of Octavia's lectures out of my mind. I would cook clean, smile, yes. But today I would also listen to that whisper in my chest that begged me not to be small anymore. As I reached my front gate, I looked back once at the quiet street. The neighborhood seemed unchanged, but inside my head old walls were already beginning to crack. I smiled to myself as I unlocked my door. It was time to cook the chicken, and perhaps time to cook up something far stronger than dinner. The moment I stepped back into my kitchen, the familiar warmth wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I unpacked the groceries, slowly setting each item on the counter with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Chicken, vegetables, cheese, cookies, everything in order, just the way Octavia liked to find it. I washed my hands and began with the chicken. Years ago, Henry had taught me a simple marinade: garlic, lemon juice, rosemary, a dash of pepper. He used to say that even cheap cuts tasted like royalty, if you had patience and a little love. I smiled at the thought, my hands working almost automatically, massaging the spices into the raw meat. As I worked, I hummed softly an old tune I used to sing to Damien when he was a colicky baby. Funny how these little rituals kept you anchored to who you once were. Halfway through slicing the carrots, the phone rang. Its shrill tone jolted me out of my quiet daydream. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up. Mom, it's me. Octavia's voice crisp and commanding even in a simple greeting. Hello, dear. We're not bringing wine today. Barnaby's stomach has been upset all week, and please no crackers this time. Felix doesn't like them anymore. I pinched the bridge of my nose, staring at the unopened box of crackers I'd bought just last week because Felix had begged for them. All right, dear. I'll buy cookies instead. Good. And Cordelia is on a strict diet, remember that. Don't push food on her, even if she says she's hungry. She has the prom coming up. Prom. Cordelia was 16, slender, beautiful, and if you asked me already, far too concerned with her reflection in the mirror. But Octavia had always wanted her daughter to be perfect no matter the cost. I understand. Anything else I asked my voice, even my mind elsewhere. We'll be there at 5. Don't overcook. We can't stay long. Barnaby has to work early tomorrow. I know. Okay. See you soon. Love you, Mom. She hung up without waiting for my reply. I stood there staring at the quiet phone in my hand. Love you, Mom. How light that sounded now, like a polite sign-off at the end of an email. Back at the counter, I chopped onions until my eyes stung. Perhaps I deserved this, the constant orders, the thinly disguised contempt. After all, I'd raised Octavia to be driven, disciplined, ambitious. Henry always said she'd either conquer the world or burn it down trying. Sometimes I wondered where the sweet, curious little girl had gone, the one who used to beg me to braid her hair every night before bed, who fell asleep, listening to my stories about faraway places she would visit someday. I shoved the thought aside. There was still a dinner to finish. The oven preheated as I layered the potatoes in a casserole dish, sprinkling them with herbs and cheese. I set the chicken to marinate a little longer and moved on to tidying up the living room. Henry's old armchair sat in its usual corner, slightly worn but sturdy. Octavia hated it, said it made the room look cluttered and dated, but to me, it was a small shrine. On lonely evenings, I sat there with a book, pretending Henry was reading over my shoulder. I ran a hand along the backrest, feeling the ghost of him close by. If he were here now, he would remind me that even soft women could bend steel when needed. Dusting the shelves, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the mantelpiece. Gray hair pulled into a neat bun, faint lines framing my mouth. I didn't look fragile, but for too long I had let them think I was. I straightened my back, smoothing the navy dress Octavia so disliked. There was power in looking exactly how you pleased, despite what people said. The clock struck 4:30. Soon they would arrive, bring their polite chaos, and sit at my table like royalty, inspecting a servant's work. But today, beneath the calm, a small storm was brewing inside me. Let them come. Let them see what happens when a quiet old woman remembers who she is. At exactly 4:50, I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. That sound, gravel shifting under the weight of Octavia's car, always made my shoulders tighten. I wiped my hands on my apron and checked the dining table one last time. The best tablecloth was smooth, the good dishes set just so. The chicken's aroma floated gently through the house, comforting but also mocking me. See how well you serve, even when your heart is elsewhere. I peeked through the curtain as the car doors opened. First, Octavia emerged, coat immaculate, high heels tapping across the walkway, as if she owned every square inch between her and my front door. Behind her came Barnaby, moving slower, face drawn from a week of stomach trouble. Cordelia followed, stylish coat, barely covering her phone in her hand. Her eyes were already glued to the screen. Last came Felix Jacket, too big for his thin frame, but his grin when he spotted me at the window was genuine. I couldn't help but wave back. Whatever else happened, the children still reminded me that not everything in my family had hardened beyond repair. The doorbell rang, once sharp, decisive. I opened the door, and the familiar chill of tension rushed in alongside the autumn air. "Hi, Mom," Octavia said, pecking my cheek with lips that left a faint red mark. Her eyes flicked past me, scanning the hallway for anything out of place. "Hello, sweetheart. Barnaby, come in. You look pale. Feeling any better?" Barnaby gave me a weary smile and shook my hand. "Better now, Mom. Smells amazing in here as always." Cordelia slipped past me without a word, fingers still dancing across her phone. Felix, however, threw his arms around my waist so fiercely I nearly toppled backwards. "Grandma, did you get the cookies I like?" he whispered, hopeful. I bent down and kissed his hair. "Of course I did. 2 kinds just for you." In the dining room, Octavia was already rearranging the chairs, muttering about angles and space, as if I hadn't hosted dinners decades before she was even born. I set the teapot and sugar bowl on a tray and brought it in. "Tea?" everyone I asked brightly. My voice sounded cheerful, almost false even to my own ears. Octavia paused and glanced at Barnaby's face. "None for him, Mom." His stomach, remember. Barnaby raised an eyebrow at his wife but said nothing. Cordelia finally looked up, her pale face softer now. "I'll have some. Can I sit in Grandpa's chair?" Octavia turned so sharply I thought her neck might snap. "Cordelia, we talked about this. That old thing needs to go." My chest tightened. I stepped in before another snide comment could form. "It stays. And if my granddaughter wants to sit there, she may." Cordelia gave me a tiny smile of gratitude. Octavia shot me a look, part disbelief, part annoyance, the same look she'd given me since she was 13, and first realized I couldn't be bullied easily when I chose not to be. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, giving me a reason to step away. I welcomed the escape. Standing by the stove, I braced my hands on the counter and forced myself to breathe. For years, I'd convinced myself it was easier to surrender to her than to fight, but that lie was wearing thin. Over the hum of my own thoughts, I heard Felix's voice drifting from the dining room. He was describing a project for school, something about building a castle out of cardboard. Barnaby's gentle praise, Cordelia's bored sighs, Octavia's constant corrections. This was our pattern, the warmth of an ordinary family moment, stretched thin by the cold edges of her control. I poured hot water over the tea leaves, listening to them swirl and bloom. I wondered how long Octavia would keep pretending this was a normal visit, how long before she played her next card. A knock on the kitchen door startled me. It was Barnaby, leaning against the frame, looking older than his years. "Need any help, Mom?" he asked softly. His voice was kind, too kind, for a man living beside a hurricane every day. I nearly told him then, the suspicion already curling in my gut like a snake. But instead I handed him the sugar bowl. "Carry this in for me, dear, and drink the tea. You deserve a quiet cup more than I do tonight." He nodded, puzzled but obedient. As he disappeared back into the dining room, I caught my reflection in the kettle's metal side. For a heartbeat, I didn't see an old woman anymore. I saw Henry's widow mother of 2, and someone no longer willing to swallow poison for anyone's comfort. Dinner began like every other second Sunday, a polite storm of passing plates, forced smiles, and the hidden friction that only I seemed to feel in my bones. Felix was the first to break the stiffness. Between bites of chicken, he launched into a story about his class project, waving his fork for emphasis. Cordelia listened, half interested, scrolling her phone under the table whenever her mother wasn't watching. Barnaby did his best to look engaged, nodding and murmuring encouragement to both children. But his eyes flicked toward Octavia now and then, as if bracing for her next correction, her next small dig at how he chewed too loudly, or wiped his mouth too often. And Octavia, my daughter, my grief, my lesson learned too late, sat regal at the head of the table she never lifted a finger to prepare. She watched all of us with a queen's suspicion. Were we behaving, speaking correctly, meeting her standard of family that only she could define? I served each plate carefully. Octavia's portion, smaller than the rest. Cordelia's the smallest, just as she'd ordered me on the phone. Barnaby's portion, ironically, was generous, perhaps out of my own soft defiance. "Mom, did you add cream to the potatoes?" Octavia asked suddenly, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as glass. "Yes, dear. Just a little for taste. It's Sunday, after all." She frowned. "I told you, it's a small treat." I interrupted, my voice gentle but unyielding. "Barnaby needs the strength." I saw Barnaby glance at me, then at his plate, as if noticing for the first time that someone at this table thought of him as more than a background prop. Silence returned, like an unwelcome guest filling the room, until Felix broke it again. "Grandma, can I have more chicken?" he asked, hopeful eyes wide. "Of course, sweetheart." I lifted the serving spoon, but Octavia's hand shot out, resting lightly on Felix's arm. "One piece is enough, darling. You don't want to get sick, do you?" I froze, spoon hovering midair. Felix's hopeful face crumpled for a moment, but he quickly nodded, pretending he didn't mind. "Okay, Mom." Cordelia rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Mom, seriously. He's a growing boy. Let him eat." Octavia's eyes narrowed at her daughter. For a moment the room was a quiet battlefield, mother versus daughter, mother versus mother. I put the spoon down. Enough tension for now. "How about some tea, then? It'll settle everyone's stomachs." I rose and carried the tray to the sideboard. My hands were steady, but inside my thoughts raced like startled birds. I poured 4 cups, one for Felix, one for Cordelia, one for Barnaby, and one for myself. Octavia never took tea this late. She claimed caffeine made her anxious. As I turned back to the table, I caught a flicker in her eyes as she watched me place Barnaby's cup in front of him. It was so fast anyone else would have missed it, but I knew my child. She had done something. Barnaby lifted his cup. "This smells good, Mom. Better than mine, too weak." He laughed, teasing. Octavia's smile was tight. "Barnaby, don't." But before she could finish, I moved behind him, my decision made in a heartbeat, forged by decades of sacrifice. "Let's swap, Barnaby. I'd like a weaker cup tonight." I lifted his tea and placed mine before him. His brow furrowed, but he shrugged. "All right, Mom, if you insist." He sipped. Octavia's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint. Cordelia and Felix kept chattering, unaware. Barnaby complimented the tea, oblivious, and I sat down slowly, my own untouched cup in my hands, heartbeat pounding behind a mask of calm. The rest of the dinner blurred into a strained politeness. Cordelia, emboldened by her small victory over her mother, asked for seconds of potatoes and helped Felix sneak an extra cookie when Octavia wasn't looking. Barnaby sipped the tea I had given him, smiling between quiet groans about his stomach. He tried to mask it, but after 20 minutes, the color drained from his face, and a cold sweat beaded his forehead. I watched it unfold with the stillness of a stone. The children giggled. The forks clinked, but in my head a clock ticked, marking the slow unraveling of the mask my daughter had forced us all to wear. Octavia noticed Barnaby shift uncomfortably in his chair. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. She laughed too loudly, brushing off his pale look with a pat on his arm. "Darling, maybe you ate too much. You know your stomach is sensitive." He forced a chuckle but pushed his plate away. Felix asked what was wrong, but Octavia snapped, "Eat your dinner." "Felix, don't worry about grown-up problems." Cordelia muttered something under her breath that earned her a glare. I kept my eyes on Barnaby. I had seen this many times in the hospital, the flush, the sudden cramps, the embarrassed glance toward the bathroom. A good man caught in someone else's cruel plan. When Barnaby excused himself, nearly tripping over the rug in his hurry to get to the downstairs bathroom, I heard a faint hiss of frustration from Octavia, masked by her concerned expression for the children's benefit. Oh, poor Barnaby. I told him not to overeat. She clucked, pretending to clear plates. Her hands trembled. I rose too. Calmly, I gathered the dirty dishes, my mind suddenly sharper than it had been in years. My daughter had slipped something into my tea. That was certain now. But did she really think a laxative could break me, reduce me to shame in front of my grandchildren, and make me pliable again? As the toilet flushed, and Barnaby's muffled groan floated back down the hallway, I found my eyes meeting Octavia's over the dinner table. For a second there was no mask left between us. Only truth. "Mom," she began, voice brittle, "I really don't know what's gotten into him. I think maybe the chicken was undercooked." "Was it?" I asked softly. I stepped closer to her, ignoring Cordelia and Felix squabbling over dessert. My voice was almost kind, but I knew she heard the iron beneath it. Or maybe something else was in the tea, I added. Her eyes widened just a fraction, then narrowed. Her mouth twisted into a polite smile, too tight to be real. "Mom, I would never." "Wouldn't you?" I asked again, my tone flat. I didn't wait for her answer. I turned, stacking plates, my back to her, so she wouldn't see the emotion that threatened to spill from my eyes. Anger, betrayal, a grief older than my wrinkles. In the living room, Cordelia had abandoned her phone and curled up in Henry's chair. Felix perched on the armrest beside her, both of them whispering and giggling about their secret extra cookies. For a heartbeat, I felt an ache so deep I thought it might swallow me whole. How could my daughter, my blood, my once beloved baby, do this? I set the plates by the sink and leaned on the counter to steady my breath. The house, my refuge all these years, suddenly felt small and stifling, the walls too close, the air too thin. I thought of Henry, of all the promises we made about protecting this family. I had failed at that, but maybe, just maybe, I could fix what was left. Behind me, the bathroom door creaked open, and Barnaby's shuffling steps returned to the table. He looked pale, but tried to joke about it for the children's sake. Octavia fussed over him, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes darted to me again and again, calculating, desperate. I met her gaze head on. I had stayed silent too long, and I would not allow her poison, literal or otherwise, to rule this house any longer. Barnaby sat back down at the table, wiping his forehead with a napkin, while pretending not to notice the awkward silence that had replaced the usual Sunday chatter. Cordelia and Felix sensed something was wrong. Even their youthful oblivion couldn't mask it entirely. "Dad, are you okay?" Felix asked, eyes round with worry. Barnaby forced a weak smile. "Just a bad stomach, champ. Nothing Grandma's tea can't fix," he said, his glance brushing mine. In his eyes I saw a flicker of confusion, turning slowly into suspicion. Octavia's laugh was brittle as glass. "Yes, maybe next time you'll listen to me about portion control, dear." Her hand landed on his shoulder more like a claw than comfort. Cordelia watched them, frowning, then turned to me and blurted out, "Grandma, why does Mom always act like this? She never lets anyone just be." The room froze. Octavia's head snapped toward her daughter so fast the chair creaked. "Cordelia, that's enough." But the girl crossed her arms, defiance flaring in her soft teenage face. "No, Mom. It's true. You always have to control everything. You didn't even want Felix to have an extra piece of chicken. It's so dumb." Felix shrank in his chair, wide-eyed, but said nothing. For a heartbeat, I almost stepped in the old habit, to keep peace. Hush the truth, protect Octavia from herself. But I stopped. This was not my mess to clean up anymore. I looked at Cordelia and nodded once slowly. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the shy, thoughtful child she used to be before her mother's constant pruning turned her into a brittle rose. Octavia's eyes darted between me and her daughter lips. Trembling with fury she was too proud to unleash in front of everyone. Barnaby, meanwhile, sat pale and silent, clearly putting pieces together in his head. I gathered the empty teacups and took them to the kitchen, leaving the battlefield behind. In the quiet of the sink, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands trembled as I rinsed each cup, one for Cordelia, one for Felix, one for Barnaby, and the untouched one for me. I traced the rim of my own cup with my finger. The poison she meant for me had turned on her instead. Not just the laxative, but the truth it had forced into the open. From the dining room, I heard Cordelia raising her voice again low, but determined, defending her brother, questioning her mother's rules. I heard Felix chime in with the brave honesty of a child. And Octavia, my daughter who had never known how to lose an argument, faltered. I heard it in the shake of her voice, the sharp breath she drew when Barnaby, gentle and weak from the bathroom ordeal, finally said in a quiet voice, "Maybe Cordelia's right, love. Maybe you do try too hard to control everything." Silence. A silence thick with realizations. I dried my hands staring at my reflection in the kitchen window, rain streaking down the glass. Outside, the garden Henry had planted was wilting under the weight of autumn storms, but beneath the fallen leaves, I knew roots ran deep, and so did mine. I turned back to the door. They would leave soon, I knew that. They would pack up their masks and drive back to their polished life, but something had cracked today. A seed planted, not of cruelty, but of truth. And I, the tired old mother they thought they could break, had done nothing more than swap a cup of tea to remind them all that I was still here. Watching, deciding, stronger than they would ever guess. After the last plate was cleared, and the last forced laugh faded into silence, I excused myself and retreated to my bedroom. I could hear Octavia's clipped voice behind me, gathering coats and hissing at Barnaby for being so careless with his digestion. She still didn't know that her plan had failed spectacularly. Behind my closed door, I sat on the edge of my bed and let my hands rest in my lap. The house hummed with muffled voices, the sound of shoes shuffling in the hallway, the slam of the front door as Felix or Cordelia darted out first, hungry to escape the tension. I heard Barnaby's low voice, apologetic even now, as if he owed her anything at all. Poor man, loyal patient, unaware until tonight of just how deep the poison ran in this family. On my nightstand, Henry's old reading lamp cast a gentle halo of light. Beside it, a small locked box held every letter, every bank statement, every quiet sacrifice that kept Octavia afloat all these years. She thought her control was complete, but she had forgotten one thing. The only thing more stubborn than her was me. I stood crossed to my late husband's study at the end of the hall and unlocked the filing cabinet that still smelled faintly of old leather and pipe smoke. I pulled out the folder labeled Octavia Mortgage and Guarantees. Inside every detail of the house, she and Barnaby called their own, the down payment that came from my pension savings, the loan she convinced me to co-sign when Barnaby's credit wasn't enough, the temporary transfer of funds she swore she'd repay in 2 years, 6 years ago. A bitter smile tugged at my mouth. She'd planned to humiliate me with a petty prank to remind me who had the power. But she had forgotten this house, this safety, this perfect image they were all built on my back. My fingers trembled only slightly as I flipped through the notarized papers. The guarantee clause was clear. At any time I could withdraw my sponsorship. If I did, the bank would review their debt again. With Barnaby's modest income and Octavia's extravagant spending, they'd never keep up the payments alone. I thought of Cordelia and Felix's children who deserved better than to be chess pieces in their mother's games. My heart squeezed painfully at the idea that they might suffer for her pride. But sometimes the only way to heal rot is to cut away the diseased branch. Downstairs, I heard the front door click shut, the final goodbye. Silence settled like snow. I carried the folder back to my room and sat at my small writing desk. One piece of paper, one signature that was all it would take to tear away Octavia's illusion of control. I turned on the lamp, its light warm against the night, creeping in outside. Then I picked up my pen. In my mind, I didn't see my daughter's cold eyes or Barnaby's pale face anymore. I saw Henry's steady hands guiding mine on our wedding certificate, his laugh echoing through our first tiny apartment, his whisper in my ear the night he promised, "You'll never be alone, Alba. Not while I breathe." And I hadn't been, not really. Even dead Henry was here. In my resolve. In my spine, now iron after years, bent low. The pen scratched across the paper in neat, decisive letters my name, my decision, my final protection for myself. I set the pen down. Outside, a lone dog barked at the moon. The night was calm again, and tomorrow so would I be calm, ready, and no longer powerless. The next morning I rose before dawn, just as I had every day of my nursing years. The sky outside was still deep blue, the garden cloaked in shadows. But inside me, the decision glowed like a small fire warming my old bones. I showered dressed in my neatest coat and tucked the signed withdrawal letter into my handbag, the same bag Henry had given me for our 25th anniversary. Funny the things that last. At the kitchen table, I sipped tea slowly, my mind calm. I thought about what I was about to do. Not revenge, not really. More like pruning a dead branch to save the tree. By 8 o'clock, I was walking into the Lakeview Trust Bank, the same place where I had once opened a modest savings account for Damien's college fund, and later guaranteed Octavia's dream home. How small those choices seemed now next to the woman who stepped up to the teller this morning, a woman no longer afraid of her own child. "Good morning. How may I help you today?" The teller chirped, polite and clueless to the quiet storm in front of her. "I need to speak to Mr. Whitfield, your mortgage manager. He knows me." A few minutes later, I was seated in his wood-paneled office. Mr. Whitfield, middle-aged, gentle eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses, greeted me with that sympathetic smile bankers save for elderly clients who they think can be nudged gently away from difficult decisions. "Mrs. Crampton, always a pleasure." "What can I do for you today?" I placed the letter on his desk and folded my hands. "I wish to withdraw my guarantee on my daughter's mortgage." His eyebrows rose, the smile slipping just a fraction. "I see. May I ask if there's an issue?" "Sometimes family disagreements." I held up a hand. "Mr. Whitfield, I have all the paperwork. I understand the consequences. I want this processed as soon as possible." He leafed through the documents, nodding slowly, then looked at me with a trace of real respect. "I must warn you, Mrs. Crampton, this will likely trigger a review of the loan. Without your guarantee, the bank may call for full repayment if the remaining income can't meet the terms." "I understand." He leaned back, studying my face, perhaps wondering what secret bitterness drove a mother to do such a thing. But I saw no cruelty in my reflection on the glass behind him, only a woman done being cornered. "Very well. We'll begin processing today. You'll receive confirmation by next Monday." I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out into the crisp morning sun, my breath forming little clouds that disappeared quickly in the blue sky. It was done. A single sheet of paper, and everything Octavia had taken for granted would shift like sand under her feet. Back home, I brewed fresh tea and sat by Henry's chair, looking at the garden beyond the window. Autumn wind rustled the branches, carrying away the last of the season's dead leaves. I pictured Octavia's reaction when she opened that letter, the panic, the frantic phone call she'd no doubt start that evening. But this time, I wouldn't answer immediately. She'd have to sit with her fear for once. The children would be all right. Barnaby, too. A gentleman doesn't deserve to pay for his wife's hunger for control. Perhaps this shake would free him, too. I sipped my tea, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt my shoulders relax. The house didn't seem to press down on me anymore. It felt mine again. In my mind, Henry's voice echoed, "Proud of you, Alba. About time." It took exactly 1 week for the cracks to reach my front door. On Monday, a courier delivered the bank's formal notice, signed and sealed. I set it on my kitchen counter untouched, except to read my name, printed at the top, Mrs. Alba Crampton, co-guarantor revoked. It felt heavier than any letter I'd held in years, yet it lifted something far heavier off my shoulders. Tuesday. My phone rang 6 times in 1 hour. Octavia, Barnaby, then Octavia again. Each call went to voicemail. I sat in my garden pruning the last of Henry's rose bushes before winter. I hummed to myself, each snip of my shears a quiet reminder. I decide when I answer now. By Thursday evening, there was a knock at my door. Not the polite tap of Felix or the hesitant knock of Cordelia, but the sharp, urgent rap that only Octavia used when she forgot her own manners. I didn't rush. I finished wiping my hands, folded the dish towel, and only then opened the door. She stood there in the porch. Light, immaculate hair, slightly windblown eyes, wide with a fear she didn't bother to hide. Barnaby hovered behind her, pale but calm, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" she blurted out before I could even say hello. "Hello to you too, Octavia. Barnaby." I stepped aside, motioning them in. Inside, the house smelled of fresh tea and the apple pie I'd baked for myself. Not for them, for me. Octavia's eyes darted around like she expected the furniture to jump out and scold her, too. Barnaby sank into Henry's chair without asking. For once, I didn't mind. "You've doomed us," Octavia hissed. "Do you realize what happens if the bank calls the loan? Do you want your grandchildren to lose their home?" I sat down across from her, calm, my hands folded over my lap. "I want you to understand, Octavia. This house was never yours alone. You built it on my trust, and you broke that." Her mouth opened, but no defense came out. Barnaby cleared his throat. His voice was soft but clearer than I'd ever heard it. "She's right, Octavia. We live beyond our means. We depend too much on your mother's money, on her patience. And you." He shook his head slowly, as if seeing her for the first time. Octavia turned on him like a cornered cat, but I raised my hand. She stopped. Old habits die hard even for her. "I'm not throwing Felix and Cordelia into the street," I said evenly. "You have options. Sell the house. Move to something smaller. Live within your means. It's time you learn." Tears welled in her eyes. Real, not performative. For a moment I almost softened. But then I remembered the taste of betrayal on my tongue that night at dinner. "Mom, please," she whispered. I stood up. The conversation was done. "You should go. It's late. I'll see my grandchildren whenever they want. My door's open for them. For you. We'll see." Octavia choked on a protest, but Barnaby rose and touched her elbow gently. He didn't look at me with anger, only quiet understanding and maybe relief. At the door she turned one last time. The cold night wind blew her hair across her face, softening the sharp edges for a fleeting second. "You've changed, Mom." It wasn't an accusation this time, more like wonder. I smiled faintly, my hand on the doorframe. "No, dear. I just remembered who I was before you told me who to be. I closed the door. In the quiet that followed, I poured myself another cup of tea. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter drifted past the window. Henry's chair creaked a little as I sat down, but in my heart there was room again for peace, for self-respect, for seasons that belonged only to me now.